A new study finds that many U.S. adults with diabetes ration insulin to save money. Researchers analyzed findings based on data from the 2021 National Health Interview Survey, which was conducted by the CDC. Now, this survey interviews tens of thousands of Americans about their health-related experiences. They found that nearly 1 in 5 adults in the U.S. with diabetes either skipped, delayed, or used less insulin than they needed in order to save on costs. And young adults and those who are uninsured were more likely to ration their medication. Shelves are fuller than they used to be, but many families with new babies in the U.S. are still having trouble finding baby formula. According to a market research firm, just 18% of powdered formula was out of stock the first week of October, compared to about 30% in July. According to the Census Bureau, nearly a third of households with a baby younger than 1 said they had trouble finding formula over the course of 1 week in September. And more than 40% said that they had only a week's supply or less on hand. Strict parenting may lead to a risk of depression in children by hardwiring changes in their DNA. Researchers in Belgium compared adolescents who reported good parenting, like those who offer support and independence to children, who reported physical punishment or manipulation. They found that those who received harsh parenting saw an increase in a small chemical molecule being added to DNA that is known to be associated with depression. Coming up next on Valley News Live at 5, looking for work? Who's hiring? And what kind of jobs are out there?